right. We're recording.
Do I call the special hearing? I'd like to call the special hearing to order. All members of council are present, and Madam Mayor and our borough manager and solicitor. At this point, I will turn it over to our solicitor. We're going to be discussing ordinance 1193.
Thank you, Mr. President. What we do with the zoning ordinance amendment is we hold a hearing, and then later in the meeting, council votes on whether to enact the amendment. So for the hearing to introduce, we go through a number of documents that become part of the hearing record, as well as any comments that the property owner or the person who has an agreement of sale for the property has, plus any comments that council and members of the public would like to make. So let me run through real quick the documents that we have and that are going to be part of the file in this matter. The first is ordinance number 1193, and we can talk about that in just a moment. In addition to ordinance 1193, we have the advertisement that's run in the East Penn Press. That document includes the public notice itself of the hearing and of the enactment. It includes the transmittal of the materials to the East Penn Press as well. Let me navigate through here. Also, when we have a zoning ordinance amendment, we have to send it down to the Lehigh County Law Library, where they keep a full copy of the amendment, and we have the transmittal information with respect to that. The Borough Planning Commission reviews every proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance, and we have as an exhibit and a document the Planning Commission agenda. And we also have the Planning Commission meeting minutes, in which the Planning Commission recommended by a vote of 4-2 to recommend enactment of the ordinance to Borough Council. We also have the transmittal of the ordinance to the Southwest Lehigh Comprehensive Plan Group, which is an organization or a group of communities that the borough belongs in, and they are given the opportunity under those agreements to look at the ordinance also. I do not have any comments from them, and it's not unusual to not receive comments. One of the things that we're required to do is to submit the draft ordinance to the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission for review. The Planning Commission, Lehigh Valley Planning Commission did respond, and they found that the proposed rezoning was consistent with the county comprehensive plan. We have the proof of publication in the newspaper, and we have the evidence of posting of the property. We also have in the record, I saw it before, I'm just paging through, we have the various notice to landowners that the borough publishes, and I'm going to assume that many of the folks here today and tonight received that notice. So those are the documents that are in the record. What I'll do very quickly is summarize the ordinance. I understand that the prospective property owner or the applicant has a presentation that they would like to make. After that, we'll open questions to the developer or the property owner by council, and then we will invite members of the public who would like to speak to come on up. What we'll do is we'll ask that you sign in with your name and your address, and then for the record, also state your name and address, because everything's being recorded tonight, and to make your comment. And we'll do it in an orderly fashion, and everybody who wants to speak gets a chance to speak. Let me very briefly summarize the ordinance. This is a zoning map amendment, and there are two properties at issue. One of the properties is called Furnace Street, and it's 6.1394 acres. The proposal calls for taking part of that property, which is light industrial, and part of it is conservation residential, and turning it to high-density residential office. The second property, and currently that property has been used, as I recall, as industrial. I will say that not long ago, Mr. Farnsworth, the zoning officer, and I were in court regarding the dilapidated structures on that property and the generally bad condition of that property, which has been the subject of numerous police calls, and we were in court on that with the owner of that property. with code violations. The second property is called the Second Street property. That is 2.734 acres, and the rezoning calls for a switch from conservation residential to the residential high occupancy. The zoning map shows that the property is surrounded by a number of different zoning districts, including the residential high occupancy, residential high-density residential office to the north and the conservation residential to the south. The sides of the property, east-west, are a little bit different. That's basically a summary of the ordinance. So I understand that Attorney Eric Schock is here tonight to represent the developer or the applicant. And Eric, if you want to have your people come up, introduce them, make a presentation, whatever it is that you would like to do.
Thank you.
So they're going to do PowerPoint.
My understanding there's a PowerPoint presentation?
Correct.
Okay.
So that covers most of what I would have said to start this off.
Okay.
So it makes it easy for me to turn it over to Andrea, because maybe the first thing we'll do is, as Mr. Dinkelhocker mentioned, my clients are in part equitable owners and owners of portions of this property, and then they will also be the developers of the property if this goes forward. So Andrea, if you want to, can we see that? Yeah. So the name that they have chosen at this point is Ironworks Apartments, and there are two primary developers. Introduce yourself, Andrea.
My name is Andrea Kenny, and also we have Jeff Trainer
Okay.
here as well.
And just mention on the slide you gave a little background as to what you guys have done over the years.
So Jeff is a developer and investor here in the Lehigh Valley. He currently is the owner of the Wind Creek Event Center. Yes.
Hard to hear you. There's a microphone right
Oh,
there.
just pull that mic over.
Oh, there it is. You got to speak pretty close to it.
Sorry about that. Okay, can you hear me better? Is this on?
I don't think it's turned on.
Is it turned on? I don't know.
Okay, so we have Jeff Trainer as one of the owners. He's a developer and investor for over 35 years here in the Lehigh Valley. He is currently the owner of the Wind Creek Event Center, which is ranked #2 in the world right now. We also have myself. Jeff and I have been partners for several years. We build retail centers and numerous apartment complexes in the Lehigh Valley.
Okay. And the next slide is just an aerial of the property, and you can see kind of in the center is the railroad, and right below that is the property running from pretty much the left-hand side where you can see the buildings over to all the way to the right, upper right corner where you see what we'll talk about later, which is the existing office building on the property. As Mr. Dinkelhocker mentioned, the biggest issue is, I think maybe calling this underutilized is probably a nice. So we thought maybe showing you some photos of what's out there and what the developers would be getting rid of is a good thing. So that's the interior of the building, correct? And we found out from the borough some of the calls that they've had to this facility.
Yes, these are just a few of illegal trespassing, arson, drug use, gang activity,
Yep.
those things.
Eric, I would add, and I'm not advocating any result, but I would
Yeah.
add that in our hearings at the courthouse on this, that much of this graffiti was identified as gang-related also.
Yeah, and we've actually,
Blur that out.
we scrubbed the video, we scrubbed the photos to take out some of the offensive stuff. So to the extent these pictures they're a little nicer than what's actually out there. There's the existing building, correct?
Correct. These are just some more interior shots.
And then this is what prompted Jeff and Andrea and their team to say, geez, this might be property we'd like to acquire and this is the vision we would have for it, which is.
So we would like to turn this into an upscale complex. Each of the buildings would be 3 stories, approximately 24 units in each apartment. These would be high-end apartments, beautifully laid out. And I mean, that's really it. I mean,
Yeah.
we're looking to do higher-end apartments in that area.
The name Ironworks, you were trying to
Based on Emmaus's history.
the fabric of the community,
Correct.
if you could. So as best you can. And I think it was obvious, but both you and Jeff are local and will remain local.
We are, yes.
I want to flip. I just took some excerpts from the petition that I thought were relevant to why, in our opinion, the request is appropriate. As Mr. Dinkelacker mentioned, we called the properties the Furnace Street property and the 2nd Street property for ease of reference. So when you look at that, that's a portion of the Borough of Emmaus zoning map, and what is outlined in blue is the Furnace Street property, and what is outlined in red is the 2nd Street property. Now, on the far right side, what you'll see is running from the bottom to the top is that RL line. Actually, the area to the right in the red is part of the 2nd Street property, but that is not being part of the request for the rezoning. That would remain as the RL. Flip. So, as mentioned, the rezoning request is we're currently the mix of the industrial zoning and the CR on what we've called the Furnace Street property, and that's the industrial property. Has the old industrial building, and actually had, unfortunately, a lot of the exterior was used for storage of industrial materials and things of that sort, which makes it a challenge, but for that one, it was the entire property. With regard to the 2nd Street property, it's just that CR portion that, again, was abutting that industrial use. And in fact, I think from what we've learned, the industrial use has kind of bled over onto that property. So it would be the CR portion. The RL portion would stay part of the RL because there actually is an active office building on that property. As we mentioned in our petition, Furnace Street's got the industrial buildings, and the engineer could tell you it's just not feasible. I know he's done a lot of these, and I've done quite a few over time. It's really, if you could redo this property as industrial, but you'd be putting up new buildings. This building there has got to come down. The condition's deplorable, and it's just not something you would ever say, oh, hey, this is great. We'll redo this and restore it to its former grange or from when it was an active industrial building. It's not going to happen. Second, the industrial use is not permitted in the CR district. While we understand this was CR because it's got some woodlands on it, it's not that. It was all used for industrial, and it does abuts the railroad track. Lastly, you wouldn't want, in our engineers and our traffic engineers' opinion, to have heavy truck traffic in this area. And obviously, with redoing this for residential use, you get cars instead of the truck traffic. The zoning boundaries running through it, those zones are incompatible. And as Mr. Dinkelacker mentioned, and if you could go back to that slide with the blue and red outlines on, when you look at that, as you'll see, candidly, it's the same. The request is for the same zoning district that's on the opposite side of the tracks, the RHO, and we're surrounded by other residential districts. So, but for this being historically an industrial piece, as the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission mentioned that residential use of this is consistent with its comprehensive plan, I think it's obviously consistent with what the existing zoning is out there today. I want to flip to the 2nd Street property. Yeah, so 2nd Street, as we mentioned, it has an office building actively used for a business office. There's a clear demarcation, though. That is a building with the parking areas that roughly abuts up to where the RL district ends, and then you move into the CR, which almost became part of that industrial area. So what you have with the 2nd Street property is a zoning boundary running through the property again. So it's a split zone property, which I think Mr. Dinkelacker would agree, oftentimes what you try to do is clean those up with UCAN, and this proposal would take that part of the property and take the split-zoned Furnace Street property and make it one consistent developable zoning district. However, since the office use is active and viable, that's going to remain on that property. And in our group's opinion, the property is suitable for residential, including the multifamily use that would be permitted, and which is the dream for this property if the rezoning were approved by the council. And you know, one of the things that the developer wanted to express was the commitment that they've gone to so far. They have undertaken a lot of work that, you know, behind the scenes, but they have together their team, the project engineer, OT Consulting, and there's a brief background on OT Consulting, which has been around for a long time, has done a lot of site development, Surface Construction, which, have you worked with them before?
Yes, they actually built the Wind Creek Event Center.
Right, and they are one of the premier firms in the valley. Traffic Planning and Design has looked at that traffic issue, and we have representatives here who can address it if there's any question on that, but certainly that was a concern from the start. In looking at this project to make sure we weren't on a fool's errand, coming in here and asking for a rezoning that wouldn't make sense and the project couldn't work. The biggest issue, and GTA can address this if need be, but you were concerned about the environmental from the start, correct?
Yes, we were. We've already completed a phase 1 and a phase 2 on the site.
And have an idea exactly what needs to be done so that this can be turned to viable residential use, and know what you need to do. And then lastly, I'm listed last, and I should be. They hired me somehow. But I think what they wanted to express was they've really, it may seem like, oh, this is the first step. Yeah, it's the first step, but they've really put their heart into making sure that if this goes through, this is going to work. So if it does, we thought we'd close with, well, what is the dream?
So if you can see the layout, we have 6 complexes, which were 3 stories, which I had mentioned, 24 luxury units in each complex, and we made sure that there would be a walking path that would connect from 2nd to 4th.
Yeah, so if you look, so the 2nd Street path would actually come through the portion of the property that's going to remain as an office, correct? But it'll get you down to 2nd Street.
Correct.
And then while, you know, it is a little too early and premature to say this is what the building will look like. You did look into what you'd hope to have something, so
yes,
a concept, I guess we could call it.
rendering that we are willing to show.
And I think for folks who are, you know,
Yes,
yeah.
This is just simply, it's an example of a project that we are currently working on. This
Right.
is not this is not a rendering of the actual
Right.
site.
It gives the character of these, and
Yes.
and as I was going to say, I think if, you know, most folks who drive through the Lehigh Valley today know that there are a fair amount of nicer high-end apartments that we didn't have in the past that I can tell you when I started 20-some years ago, I did a lot of, probably half my practice was residential work, but it was all single-family subdivisions back then. There was very few times you came across it. That's really switched, and just like the Lehigh Valley's changed, what we're getting now is a lot of these types of projects, and you know, for example, the ones that I think there's ones in South Whitehall, for example, over behind the by IHC and that are the
Yes.
same. Much more. I mean, there's a lot more units there, but the same type of thing where you get very attractive upscale apartments because that's where the demand is.
Correct.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, so hopefully that provides an understanding and an explanation of why we think it's appropriate for the ordinance change, irrespective of what the developer has in mind, but also just to give you an idea of who's involved and what they're looking to do if this goes through.
Okay, thank you. Brent, I'll turn it back over to you for questions by council for the developer.
Anybody have questions for the developer that they want to bring forward? Roy?
Sure. So as I was listening, you had mentioned about the environmental, phase 1, phase 2. What type of results have you found?
Yeah. So I will, as you ask these questions, pass it off to the appropriate person, if that's all right.
Yeah, and could we just have your name and your company affiliation, please?
Jeff Christopher, Geotechnology Associates, professional geologist with the state of Pennsylvania since 2014. Some of the results we're seeing, we are seeing some impacts on the site related to petroleum and historic operation of the foundry, particularly a slag that was left on the property. So with that said, there are challenges, but we think we can meet those challenges, clean up the site, and I think ultimately what we would be looking to do is take the site through Pennsylvania's Act 2 program. Excuse me. The Act 2 program is the land recycling program, and it gives you the DEP sign-off at the end of the day that there's no impacts to receptors, and everything is being done in accordance to regulations. Excuse me.
And is there anything you came across that you think would have prevented this, or it's all manageable if done the right way so that this project can succeed?
No, it's an opportunity. Like I said, there are some challenges, but it's doable.
May I ask a different question? Just in general, I did see the rendering, and I know one of the issues, I actually live on South 2nd Street for the record, is that there would be emergency access but not a road that actually comes out. Can you definitively say that there will not be a road coming out through to South 2nd?
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Ott. I'm with Ott Consulting, licensed engineer in the Commonwealth since 1994, president of Ott Consulting, Inc., civil engineers, surveyors, and landscape architects. So to answer your question directly, it is not our intent to put a roadway through that 2nd Street property. The intent for that property is to convert that existing building into my office. People have asked me, are you going to demolish it? The answer definitively is no. We do not want to demolish that building.
But your parking lot is there, and you're not thinking of taking a drive through the parking lot. You wouldn't do that.
We wouldn't do that. If that were to be required, if for some reason down the road someone goes, we want a permanent drive there, we're going to have to take a look at that. I don't want to do it. I don't think it's wise to have a full driveway access going through my employee parking lot.
Correct, and I guess my also issue is you have the railroad, trestle, train
Correct.
bridge there, and anyone that would try to turn out of there, you would have issue.
It's hard to make a left-hand turn because of the sight distance out of the
Correct.
property.
Okay, thank you.
But to piggyback on that, that will be an emergency exit though, correct?
Yeah.
Or emergency access for our vehicles?
Yes, that would be an emergency access only, so it will be gated. We can work with the borough on, if we move forward, where do we want to put the gate? How is the gate going to be operated? Those types of detail things. But it'll be gated off and it'll be closed.
So emergency purposes only.
That's correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Chris?
So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Shane, or solicitor, others have looked at this property before, but everybody's walked away after the phase 1 environmental, correct?
My understanding is it's been a very difficult property for the prior owner to sell, which is why nothing had happened to it. And that was a result of some of the environmental conditions on the site.
Yeah, that's correct. I know of 6, and just in the last couple of years, I know of 2 or 3 that have signed intentions to buy, but once they saw the phase 1, and they knew that there were barrels, in the backyard, and what might the cost be to mitigate those environmental issues, it was way beyond what they would be willing to pay because there's a profit point. So they've all backed out.
Kind of follow up there. So phase 2 environmental, for us, those of us that don't know, it's obviously more extensive, is there a phase 3, a phase 4?
So your phase 2 is literally collecting soil and groundwater samples to identify what impacts there are. A Phase 3 would be considered more of a remediation component, and we do think there will be a remediation component to this project. And as far as a Phase 1, there were multiple recognized environmental conditions identified, and we have been addressing those and investigating those conditions.
I'm Jeff Trainer. What happens normally when people develop is, and why, Shane, you had mentioned that a number of problems that developers walk away, is because they don't want to spend the money to find out what really is going on. Normally when someone develops, they get the contract with the previous owner. They come in, that gives them a lot of time to maybe research it. And what they do is they do a Phase 1, which is a minimal cost. And when I say minimum, a few thousand, not a huge amount of money. And so what happens is when they get that and they see a million problems in there, because there's a lot of language that most people don't understand, including myself. I'm looking at it from 10,000 feet in the air and seeing how much is it going to really cost. And so what happens is they usually stop there. And that's what's kind of happened at this property for everyone walking away, is because they wanted to maybe get the zoning changed, that they were in benefit from a zoning change versus really getting the job done. What we've done, Andrea and I, is we've put up quite a bit of money. This is now tens of thousands of dollars, good tens of thousands of dollars, to really move ahead now, which is odd as a developer. And I think even the environmental people would say that it's very odd that someone would spend that kind of money not knowing whether or not they had a deal or that they were able to get this project approved to move forward on. We did that. We're local. We've been here. We have horsepower to get a deal done, which is what it takes. But on top of that, we wanted to really know what's going on here. And the only way to do that is spend the money to know what's going on. We've been a couple things where we've been here once. We're a little bit favorable. It seemed to be. We went to the planning where it seemed like it was favorable that this is a site that something needs to happen on. We came up with a plan we felt was good, and we're putting some dollars behind it right now to make sure that we know exactly what's going on and we don't mess it up in any way. We surround ourselves with great talent. That's what I pride myself in when I do deals, because I don't know. I started with nothing. I don't know everything out there. We put up teams together. When we ran concerts, I never ran a concert in my life. I never ran a nightclub in my life. We figure it out, but we surround ourselves with great talent. We brought Live Nation, we brought Ticketmaster, we brought the casino. We did the same thing here. We brought great engineers, experts in the environmental, good attorneys. They may not pat themselves on the back, but they're the best, that are out there in looking at these things to make sure we don't make mistakes, along the way. We did the traffic study. We completely did a traffic study prior to coming in here so that we knew where that stood. If that was a big problem, we basically at that point would have pulled away. But we've been getting all favorable things. I call it putting the pieces of the puzzle together, where all the pieces of the puzzle were put together. And everything has been looking good. So when we come in here, we're coming in here prepared, not just secondary where we're just winging it. So, anything else? No. Also, well, one more thing. Neighbors. We met with some of the neighbors that we felt were issues, and problems along the way. And we're sentimental to some of those neighbors that we met with. In fact, I'd like Jeff to even just say, because we've altered things. We've done numerous prints on this, to try to get something that works for everyone.
Yeah, so if you took note at the sketch plan that was up on the screen there earlier, there's a 6th unit that was on the easternmost side of the property, and the neighbors at that end had some concerns, and I was asked, can we do something about that? So we studied it. And ultimately, we moved the building. We put it on the western side of the property, and it's going to work out good for everybody because it removes that disturbance to the existing neighbors at the eastern end, and we can get the benefit of the large hole in the ground where the million-gallon storage tank used to be. There was an above-ground million-gallon storage tank back there in the 60s, 70s, and probably 80s. So we're going to take the benefit of that and use it. So it was a good idea. And
one last thing, it wasn't easy to work with the gentleman that owns this property. He's a lawyer, so you know how it's not ever easy to work with lawyers. But no, I mean, he's from Philadelphia. He has a lot of money. He develops things, you know, all over. He buys brownfields. He sits on them for years and years and years, and he doesn't care whether or not something happens. You know, so I went and met him, you know, put something together, and was able to negotiate a deal that was a fair deal, and really what it was a win-win. You know, that's the way I like to see things come out, that it's a win-win at the end of the day. And so, you know, it's been a lot of little things to get done to get to where we're at here today. This has not been, I want everyone in this room completely to know that this has been a lot of work, time, and effort. And, you know, we're good at what we do, and we get things done. And we have a good track record, and we're local.
Good. So two more questions, I think. Justin, you can answer them in any order. So once the phase 2 is done, I would assume that whatever it identifies then has to be fixed, or it's up to the individuals to fix that. That's my first question. And the second one would be, can you give us some examples of some other apartment projects that you've done that would be somewhat similar to this?
Yeah, so when you go through that remediation phase, you're working in conjunction with the Department of Environmental Protection, and you're remediating the site to eliminate exposure risk to future residents and exposure risks to groundwater that could create any adverse impacts from vapor intrusion into buildings or direct contact types of scenarios. And there's different ways you can look at it, and it allows for some creativity, but it's also ultimately based on eliminating a risk of exposure to the contamination. For this project, we think there will be some remediation as far as digging out soil impacts. There will also be a component of capping existing impacts, and capping is basically putting a parking lot on top of stuff that you can't dig out, or it could include 2 feet of clean soil, so no exposure to that material would essentially, it's just not practical. And then there would be a long-term maintenance component of maintaining the parking lot, maintaining landscaped areas, and it's just kind of all built into how the DEP views these sites and what would be done.
So the DEP would follow up on that to make sure it was?
So there would be a series of regulatory submittals, and these are big reports, 100,000-page reports with different appendices, and it presents your characterization data to say, well, this is what we found in the phase 1. This is how we investigated those concerns, and this is how we're remediating those concerns. And you present a cleanup plan to what you're proposing to do. The state would review that, sign off on that material, and then you go out there and you do the work, and when the work's done, you submit a final report that documents what was done, and the state would review that and either approve or request additional work.
Am I correct also that ultimately there are environmental covenants then that are placed on the land that the owner and subsequent owners of the property are all bound to abide by those environmental covenants, and DEP is a beneficiary, and I believe maybe even the borough might be a beneficiary of those environmental covenants? Am I correct in that regard? Or am I maybe operating under another?
No, you're accurate.
Okay.
An environmental covenant would come in towards the end of the game when that final report's being submitted, and that covenant will document what conditions are on the property and what pathway elimination scenarios will be required to have that final approval. And that'll stay with the property deed through the end of the time or until what impacts are there are cleaned or removed from the site.
Right. I think because I've been involved in environmental covenants before, and my recollection is, though, that they are enforceable by DEP and they are enforceable by the municipality in which they're located. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure. But maybe you can clarify for me.
As far as maintaining that component,
Yes.
it is required by the DEP. There's been some flexibility, but oftentimes it comes up when you're trying to refinance or keep or any kind of property transaction. That's when it resurfaces, and those are really a component of the sale or financing.
Thank you.
Yeah, It's unequivocal, though, that if this project is developed, the property will be in a better condition than it is today significantly. It has to be.
Oh, absolutely.
So I have a question. One of the concerns, and you've addressed some of the concerns I've heard from some of our citizens, but one of the concerns, and you said it, that you had a traffic study conducted. And one of the concerns that we've heard from citizens is the amount of traffic that may or may not come out of the complex. So can you speak to the results of your traffic study?
Yep, we have the traffic engineer here.
Hi, I'm Pete Spizak. I'm a senior project manager with Traffic Planning and Design. So we did a traffic study. We generated the trips that would be generated by this site based off the Institute of Transportation Engineers, the trip generation manual. Basically, they study thousands of different uses and come up with rates for each individual use. And for the apartments that are being proposed here, we're looking at basically 52 trips in the AM peak hour, 63 trips in the PM peak hour, and 784 trips per day. So in the peak hours, you're looking at about 1 trip per minute, which will be very, there's going to be a little bit more traffic on the roads, but you're really not going to notice it. And it bared out in the analysis that the intersections that we studied currently operate at level service A being the best, F being the worst. So they currently operate at level service A, and with the site, they would continue to operate at level service A.
And you can't get better than that, correct?
Can't really get better than that.
No, that was.
That's it?
No, I want to answer, because you had a two-part question, okay? I'll tell you just a small story. He said that what other projects might have done.
Very similar.
Okay, this is not an apartment one, but it's a major project, and it's a high-profile project. When Bethlehem Steel basically closed down, and all the land was done as a brownfield, and I believe the biggest brownfield in the United States, at one point it was. I got called in at that time to invest in Bethlehem Steel. There was nothing built there at all. It was fields that were there. Dan Schatz and I spent $9 million putting a deal together with the Philadelphia Flyers, and we built the hockey facility that was down there. At first it was called the Skate Zone. It's now the Steel Ice Center. It's been there for about 14 years. I don't even like hockey, but we did that for the community, and we ran into huge challenges there. Even Bethlehem Steel didn't realize what's going on. And when I say challenges, we had reports done by Bethlehem Steel for cleanups and by the state for cleanups for environmental. The reports, when he said earlier that there are a lot, if you stack them up on the table here, it'd be like a foot and a half high, thick, which you don't ever read, as far as that goes. We had those reports. When we started digging and doing foundation work for our hockey facility, there were tunnels underneath where Bethlehem Steel they put tunnels in for the war and stuff, figuring that we might possibly get bombed here. And they had exit moves and different things. We had to fill in. We spent about $600,000 filling in, areas that none of us knew existed, along the way. And built on the worst brownfield that there is. When we built that facility, the mayor, I believe at the time, I don't know if it's John Callahan, but I remember him saying how we pioneered, something to happen on that site by something so good coming in. Bethlehem Steel didn't even have the money for the parking lot. We paved all the parking lot you see today that's for Music Fest and everything there, I paid for, to get done. Just so that there was parking down there along the way. And when the Sands came and I wanted to do an event center, they knew who we were. I dealt with Sheldon Adelson, who's the 11th or 12th richest guy in the world, okay, to put a lease together. For 55 years, he gave me a lease for the event center, and I never ran one concert, okay? So that says something on our character, coming in, and doing something. And we took that event center and made it, as Andrea pointed out earlier, it's been rated for 4,000 seats or less, #2 in the world. So, we are good at figuring things out, but real estate, we really know. I mean, I've been developing real estate since I'm 20 years old, and I'm a lot older now, so that was a project that was a brownfield project, and we figured it out.
I just want to follow up to make sure nothing's changed. I was a part of the the committee that when early in the stage you came in and you showed us a project in Alberta that you did, that you said this would be very similar to, right, apartments, it was apartments,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
So can you just tell us one or two like
Yeah,
that,
well-
just to, because I know some of the things I hear throughout town are, you know, this would be okay, but maybe I wouldn't want that, and just
Sure.
tell
Well,
us something.
we don't always like to say high end, you know, meaning like like we're doing this super high end. Andrea and I do projects like that are, I'd say $1 million to $2 million. We've done a number of them where we build like 8 apartments, or we built 5248 Hamilton where Red's Jewelers is. We take, that was American Kitchens. It was a dilapidated property, you know, that needed attention. You know, we took a property and just put a nice little strip center on it. When we did the apartments in Albertus, we took an old piece of land that was really terrible and huge challenges along the way. In fact, the firemen burned it down, you know, just for practice. That's how bad it was. And we put we had a great presentation, but we put a great program together in building their two-bedroom units, two-bedroom units, and really high-end. You know, when I say high-end, nice. That I think anybody sitting in here would be proud to live in. And, you know, we did that where the rents ranged. I think the handicap ones were about $1,300, $1,350, you know, in that range. So it's not like we're charging $2,000 for apartments or what have you. But we're not like HUD projects, or like I look at the property below us, you know, where you have like, I don't know if that's a HUD, you know, a project, but it's just they don't take care of their properties. You know, you get these apartment complexes, they don't watch them, they don't take care of them. I mean, I'm used to managing our own stuff, where we keep an eye on it. You know, we have our own people there. You know, that's how I do it with everything. People sometimes say to me, well, how do you manage this? How do you manage an event center? And then you're building another one maybe up at Foxwoods, and you're building another one in California, and you're doing this. It's because we surround ourselves with good people, the people that know what's going on. And that's what we want to do here. We want to build something and know that we've got our own teams here doing it. So, and the other thing with Jeff Ott being on the other side, if this wouldn't get approved now, I don't know that we'd ever have access where something could be approved there, because we were able to put a deal together with him coming in, buying one part of the parcel, we're buying the other, and we're working together, you know, to make this thing work. Without that access going out on his side, you'd never be able to build something else here. And so, you know, when you say about pieces of the puzzle, these are challenges that we're working on. We're not telling everybody everything we're doing, but, you know, we're thinking it through, you know, so that it's done properly.
The question was, is the program going to change that apartment, like we showed them the interior of that apartment?
Well, it's going to be a little bit nicer because we only put 1 bath in. You know, these will have 2 baths in. They'll be a hair bigger, you know, and stuff, but it's going to be just like
Thank you.
that.
That's what I was getting at. 'cause
Yes,
I
I
was expecting to kind of see something
apologize.
similar tonight.
It's going to be just like
Then
that.
it was like it wasn't
Nice
there, so-
kitchens, modern, you know, great
That
flooring,
answers
you
my
know,
question. Thank you.
really, really nice.
I got a question. What are your intentions to surround the facility?
When you say
So
surround,
basically around the outside of the perimeter.
we're going to fence it in like a fort.
No, you're
No.
no.
Right now, at this point, the conceptual plan, of course, we're trying not to disturb any woods along boundary lines if we can avoid it.
Okay.
Along the railroad tracks, that secondary rail that runs through town, we're probably going to be grading up to near the property line there within reason. Along the back, I would call it the south side, there's a 50-foot strip of land there, which is formerly known as Perkiomen Street. We don't want to touch that. It's a 50-foot wide strip. We have rights to 25. The other property owners have rights to 25 feet. We're going to work on that.
Okay.
On the east, I call it the southeast corner of the property where that 1 million-gallon storage tank used to be, there's a large embankment that comes down into the project site. Our goal is to not touch that embankment nor any of the trees around it, because that creates a wonderful buffer. And when you cut down a tree or you disturb earth, it all costs money. And we're going to make the best use of what's there right now. Make the best use of it because it's economical to do it that way too.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. In regards to the traffic study, so it's 6 buildings, 3 floors, 24 units, correct, approximately? So about 144 total units, correct?
Correct.
And then, do you average about 2 cars per household when you do that? And is adequate parking for that? And just the traffic coming out of there, you know, looking at, you know, right there's 144 units. Most people have at least 1 car, if not 2.
Yeah, correct. So our numbers, the AM and PM peak, they're basically based on an hour. So it's the highest hour in the AM peak and the highest hour in the PM peak. Throughout the day, the site would generate 784 trips per day. So if you think about it, from 144 apartments, you have 352 enter, 352 or 392 enter, 392 exit. So it's basically, like you said, two trips per day per unit.
Okay. And the road basically is 4th Street going up to there, and that can handle that additional traffic flow?
Yeah, like I said earlier, we studied a couple intersections along 4th Street, and those intersections operate today at a level service A. In the future, with the site and with background growth traffic that we added, the intersections would continue to operate at level service A.
Okay, thank you. And I just have one last question. I apologize, but am I correct in the statement? If you did not have a change in zoning, someone could build, say, another industrial type place and have truck traffic, and I think you said that in there, correct?
It's zoned for industrial.
Correct. So you could have trucks coming in day and night if you really wanted to put a warehouse up there.
You're right. You're 100% right. We could do that now.
Without any.
Without any zoning change whatsoever. We could rip down what's there and probably even build more space than what was there in the past and not have to be back here or anywhere, you know, to do something, I'm sure.
Yeah, the Furnace Street property has industrial zoning.
Right.
Right.
So.
Well, I think that probably would be worse if we had giant trucks coming there on, like.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily the volume, correct?
Right, so.
If you want to explain that, just so everyone understands.
So today, 4th Street is about 33 feet wide with parking on either side. So when you start adding, you know, a truck or tractor trailer up through there, I mean, it'd be tight to get, I mean, especially if 2 trucks went by at the same time, I don't know they'd be able to get through. It'd be tight. And then also, at some of the intersections with the intersection radii and everything, with the turning movements, it'd be very difficult for a truck to maneuver around there.
Okay.
So then, just to follow up on Roy then, so Shane and solicitor, we obviously have some problems here at 4th and Broad, because it's a 3-way stop sign. I mean, we've done some things to try to make that better. Do we completely control a 4th stop sign going there or not? If we wanted to.
So we do not control 4th Street, period.
Okay.
That's state road at that intersection. So that is purely 100% PennDOT. We've solicited them in the past. Madam Mayor, I think you were part of that over the years. And my understanding is that they were not receptive of putting the fourth stop sign in.
Anyone else? I know the answers to this because I met with some of you with the General Administration Committee. But water runoff is a big issue in the borough here, and I want somebody to just explain how the water runoff is going to be handled.
This particular site is located in the Little Lehigh Creek. There's an Act 167 for Little Lehigh Creek. I believe there's a sub-area number 159, which is a 30-100 release rate district. So what that means is during the 2-year design storm, we have to reduce the runoff by about 70%. For the rest of the design storms, your 25, 50, 100, you cannot increase the rate of runoff. In addition, an NPDES permit will be required for this project. It's a national permit that's run by Pennsylvania DEP in the state of Pennsylvania. And that has certain runoff limits and certain water quality requirements as well.
So will it be like a detention pond or anything like that?
Likely where the 1 million gallon storage tank used to be in the back. I keep referring to that, but I hope you can picture that. It's on the eastern end. The plan is to, by installing an emergency access back in that area, we can actually build a berm there and enclose that low depression and use that for both stormwater management, perhaps infiltration, or perhaps a spray irrigation system, throughout the property. Because we have to infiltrate the increase in the 2-year design storm. We have to infiltrate the increase in volume for the 2-year design storm.
Anybody else?
It's a high bar.
Okay. Do you want to open it up to the public now?
If you're ready, sure.
Sure.
Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to open it up to people in the public who have comments, and what I'd like to do is we'll try to do it orderly. We'll do it by row, and we'll start with the side of Borough Hall that is along the railroad tracks. So is there anybody on this side of the room that would like to speak? Okay, yes, sir, come on up.
And if you could just state your name and your address, please.
My name is Jack McSturdy. I live at 347 South 2nd Street in Emmaus, the illustrious Mr. Councilman's neighbor over there. I got a real concern with the traffic, nice expert you got here. On Friday, I tried to leave my house with the power failure at the light down at Main Street. And I got down to 2nd and Minor Street, and a 7th generation school and their buses commandeered the intersection. They commandeer the entire little intersection heading to the school and heading back up Minor Street. It gets so overrun with school buses in the morning that you're waiting in line because there's car parked on the street, we have school buses coming in and out, and you're trying to maneuver through cars, through traffic, just to get about your own business. Now, it happens twice a day with 7th generation. They come up 2nd Street, they try to make the turn on to Minor to go up to the school. They stack up at that corner, and traffic stops. They stop in the middle of the intersection because he can't make it all the way in because the bus line didn't move. So rather than wait in line, I'll just park here. So now we're going to add another 800 cars into this whole little scheme of things. You don't have the space, or we have to have better traffic controls or something to take care of this traffic. Maybe if the buses came up and came down and dropped off in front of the school and just use 2nd Street as the exit. But we can't continue to have the traffic problems that we got down here, and you're going to throw in another 700 cars on top of this. They're going to try to come down Minor Street, and they are going to get jammed up on 2nd Street. There's nowhere to move. And those bus drivers that won't wait in line, they come up and they use Landis Circle as a turnaround, and Landis Circle is crumbling because the road is not made for buses. And we have cars parked on Landis Circle. We have buses that are 40 feet long. They're trying to make the turn at the top of the hill. We come down, we have to make another turn at the bottom of the hill. And it's just an unreasonable place to put them. And then they come down 2nd Street, and they'll pull in, and they'll park on the curb, on the corner, waiting to make their right-hand turn to go up to the 7th school to drop them off. Now, as I'm coming down, and I want to make a right-hand turn to come up to my home on 2nd Street, I can't see past the damn bus. So now I'm putting myself out in traffic, and, it's a crapshoot. I don't know. I mean, all respect to this gentleman over here. I don't know if you did a computer-generated study or what, or you have a guy with a counter in his fingers. But I'm telling you what, you look at the same intersection that I do. And that's not trying to be ugly or anything else, but there's other considerations other than just, hey, let's put this down. I really appreciate the effort. It's a nice spot. But you got to have some sort of better traffic controls because you only have a 30-foot wide intersection down here.
Mr. McSturdy,
Yes.
From what I understood, though, there's no traffic exiting onto 2nd Street. I'm just saying that.
I understand that. I understand that.
But you're saying they're still going to come. You're still saying they're going to funnel around.
Yes, we're still going to have an additional 700 cars coming down and say, "Oh, hey, I'm going to shoot down Minor Street. I don't want to go across the bridge." Whatever. You're going to put increasing traffic coming down that narrow Minor Street, and you're going to put school buses in there as opposed to delivery trucks and tractor trailers. You have a problem down at 2nd and Minor, and 700 more cars a day is not going to alleviate it.
Okay.
I'm all for the community improvement. I'm not trying to put a roadblock up here, but we have to come up with some kind of a better traffic flow than what because right now we can't move. Right now it's difficult to travel through this our side of town down here, between the railroads, the railroad crossings, and the trains going by. everything just gets backed up and gets backed up. And it happens really bad twice a day, when the kiddies come into school and when the kiddies leave school. And it's just horrific. I mean, Friday there should have been a police officer down here. It was just an absolute calamity on 2nd and Minor. After I left and I got through the thing, I just couldn't comprehend why we don't have a police officer down there trying to direct some traffic. You have the light out on Main Street, everybody's backing up, there's no place to go.
All right.
So thank you very much.
Okay.
Your concern is traffic, I understand, okay.
Is there anyone else on the railroad side of the room? Yes, ma'am. Come on up.
I'm apparently 8 inches shorter than everybody else. My name's Angie Devers. I'm 214 South 4th Street. And I think I share his concern, but maybe more so as all of the exiting traffic is directed onto South 4th Street. We had a beverage facility move into one of the older warehouses a couple months ago. As traffic study mentioned, it's a 33-foot-ish wide road with parking on both sides. There's no yellow line, there's no double line. There's no stop sign at 4th and Furnace. So we already have a small problem there. We also have the bus traffic from 7th Gen, from St. Anne's School. We also have the ball fields up at the top of the hill. So you mentioned that 4th Street is not ours to control.
Well, no,
it goes through PennDOT.
Actually, up to Broad Street.
Okay.
Beyond that, that is ours to control.
So I guess my concern, and I see a bunch of my neighbors, which is awesome, is are we going to get a stop sign, a stoplight, a something to help that traffic ease out of Furnace Street onto 4th? I'm thinking some of it's going to go into town with the small railroad crossing and then over the bridge, over the large railroad crossing. Some of it might continue across Furnace, across South 4th to South 5th, and either over the hill into Center Valley or down 5th to Broad. But my concern is, where is that traffic control coming from? And of those 700-ish trips, how many are going to go which way? Yay.
Okay. Thank you, Angie. Is there anyone else on this side of the room that would like to speak? Okay, come on up, ma'am.
I'm Emily Chisak. I'm at 4802 South 5th Street, so I'm way up the hill, but my concern is the schools. My son goes to Lincoln, and my daughter will go there. And my son is in 2nd grade, and they just had all of their desks taken away because there are too many kids to fit in the small classroom that they have. So the solution was to take away the desks, put in little tables, and cram all the kids in the tables. So if now we're talking another 144 apartments that probably will have some kids. You know, Lincoln is pretty overcrowded. I'm pretty sure Jefferson is in the same position. So we've talked about runoff and environment and traffic, but how is this going to affect our schools? Because I think it's pretty pathetic that in East Penn School District, my 2nd grader doesn't have a desk. So how is it going to affect the schools? And I heard the high school now no longer has certain like homeroom times because they're getting overcrowded, and so I'm just wondering if we're really talking about the future. What this, if there have been any studies about how it's going to affect the elementary schools.
Yeah, obviously we have no control over the school district, but under the municipality's planning code, and Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection is the school district gets notice of whatever impacts there might be. Am I correct in that regard? Yes.
So they get notice of it, but...
Well, it's up to them, ma'am, to deal with it.
Yeah, so understand that there's a zoning piece and there's a planning piece. During the planning piece is when we actually see a real drawing that is what they're applying for, that's when the school district would be notified and those discussions would occur. For a zoning change, that's not the time where we would talk to the school district.
So we could potentially make the change and say, good luck dealing with that.
So understand that what they're doing is they are purely saying here, making a decision as to whether or not they want the zoning to remain what it is or residential. They're not approving You know, they talked 144 units, they talked all sorts of other things. They don't approve that now, okay? They don't approve exactly how many units would go in there. That's part of the planning phase. So when they come to us with an official plan, if they approve the zoning change tonight, when they come to us with an official plan, that's when we would talk to the school district and say, you know, they're asking for 4 buildings, they're asking for